tous et à vous tous.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to meeting number 38 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Pursuant to the order of reference of Thursday, February 12th, the committee is resuming its statutory review of the Lobbying Act. It's a pleasure for me to chair the meeting today. I will be replacing my colleague, Mr. Brassard.
The translation. Okay, you're not hearing me? The choice of the French, English, and floor. Okay. Si je continue à parler en français, vous allez...
If I continue to speak French, you should be hearing English interpretation. Perhaps somebody will be able to give you a hand?
Just to be sure that you understand me very well. Ça arrive. On continue. Est-ce que ça va bien?
Are you hearing interpretation now? Are you hearing me now? All right. I would like to thank the witnesses for joining us today and to contribute to the committee's work. We will be able to carry out a study on the legislative framework surrounding lobbying in Canada, its efficiency, its transparency, and on potential improvements throughout this legislative review. For the first hour of today's meeting, we have, as an individual, the Honourable Joe Jordan and Mr. Dan Hurley, Board Director and Treasurer from Public Affairs Association of Canada. And we'll announce the witnesses for the second hour later.
Before the committee today, your perspective and your expertise will be valuable as members continue their statutory review of the Lobbying Act. Comme à l'habitude, vous allez avoir...
As usual, the witnesses... There's nobody online currently, so I would remind everyone that all comments need to be made through the chair. We are going to be starting with witness testimony. Mr. Jordan and Mr. Hurley, you have 5 minutes each for your opening remarks. We'll start with Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start by thanking the committee for the opportunity to participate in this review. I was talking to the committee clerk beforehand, and this is the third time over the last 20 years that I've appeared on the Act. I'm one of those strange individuals, I think, that takes an inordinate amount of interest in it. I certainly don't claim to be particularly unique, but I feel as a former member of Parliament, a former exempt staff in a minister's office, and currently a registered consultant lobbyist, albeit in the twilight of that career, I'm in a unique position to provide the committee experiential feedback from multiple perspectives on overall effectiveness of the Lobby Act in terms of meeting its public policy objectives, and perhaps highlight a few unintended consequences. For the record, since its inception, I've been I've been and remain a strong, consistent, and vocal supporter of the Act and the personnel that administer and enforce it. The evolution from a system, our prior system, that simply registered lobbyists to one that regulates lobbyist activities was not only necessary but long overdue. But the implementation of that is always going to be challenging. We're attempting to place a usable framework over the intersection of human interactions, self-interest, advocacy, charter rights, parliamentary privileges, ethics rules, procurement processes, conflict of interest laws, and post-employment obligations. For context, though, I think it's important to recognize that the system we have in place is not only working, but it's working well. Canada is consistently ranked as being in the top tier of lobbying rules globally, and in the OECD 2026 Integrity Report, Canada's regime was scored at twice the average among the 62 countries studied. So in the spirit of making a good bill better, I've structured my comments around the recommendations that the Commissioner made in her submission, as I think that provides a very useful focus to the review. So I'll start with recommendation number 2, which clarifies who qualifies as in-house lobbyists. And this amendment would ensure that board directors would be treated as employees under the Act. I think there's general support for this, but it's a very interesting recommendation because I think it illustrates the point I made about the complexity of trying to implement this regime. When the original bill was drafted, the focus was on persons that were paid to lobby and the contacts with decision makers of influence. Boards weren't on the radar and were not captured in the statute. When the decision was made to attempt to regulate board member actions, it came down to whether they were paid or not, a net of direct expenses. So organizations would look at their board and decide, were they being paid over and above expenses, which meant they had to register as consultant lobbyists, or if they were simply paid expenses or volunteers, there was no requirement to register. So it wasn't an ideal situation. This particular recommendation will fix part of that. I'm not sure how it addresses the paid, not paid part, but it makes me a little bit nervous for a separate reason. In the wake of Enron and the move we're seeing in corporate governance towards independence, I think you want to be careful with a deeming provision that uses the term employee. And if you're going to go that route, I would suggest that you make sure that the amendment very clearly states that it applies only to this act and it doesn't create an employment relationship for any other purpose, so that you don't have conflicts with other acts where employee is a legal term with a legal definition. Recommendation number 10, status of staff who work in ministers' offices for leaders of the opposition. Essentially, this is trying to extend the designated public office holder characterization or classification to additional political staff. I'll just say my part, but given the average career span of a political staffer is about 4 years, I feel the current 5-year lobby ban is both unnecessary and, in fact, I think is punitive. I think the post-employment restrictions should align directly with the ethics and conflict of interest rules, so you don't have two sets of rules, and that a ban on lobbying activities should be removed entirely if the governing party changes. From somebody that practices on the ground, I think that's a perfectly reasonable approach. These are people we know. We're trying to get people interested in politics, and I can tell you that 5-year ban has a very, very real impact on what these people do when they leave ministers' offices, which is a bit of a revolving door at the best of times. I don't think we should be expanding that category without first adjusting its scope and intent. Recommendation 11, inclusion of Director General level positions in the definition of designated public office holder. I guess I would need to be convinced that throwing a wider net contributes to a better outcome. The current threshold captures about 30 deputy ministers, about 380 Ms, senior management in Crown, certain military leaders, and a few diplomatic personnel. So throwing another 900 on that pile, I don't think makes a lot of sense. I think it's an administrative burden without any kind of proven benefit. The final one is the recommendation number 12, and I think this is an important one for members of Parliament. In 2010, the Lobby Act extended DPOH status to parliamentarians. It was done through order in council. It wasn't done through debate. It wasn't done through discussion. I volunteer as somebody that works with defeated MPs, and the following election was the largest turnover of MPs in Canadian history. And when I spoke to these MPs, the majority of them from all parties had no idea that change was made or what the implications were. This particular recommendation...
Merci beaucoup. On pourra continuer quand même le 5 minutes.
Thank you. Apologies, your 5 minutes are up, but you'll be able to continue when questions are asked later. So thank you.
If you want to have 5 minutes, thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci aux membres
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to committee members.
Members of the committee for this opportunity. My name is Dan Hurley, and I am appearing today on behalf of the Public Affairs Association of Canada. We are the national association representing public affairs, government relations, and advocacy professionals across Canada. We have chapters in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. L'Association canadienne des affaires publiques
PAAC welcomes the statutory review of the Lobbying Act. Our members strongly support its core objective, promoting transparency, ethical conduct, and public confidence in federal decision-making.
Our message today is straightforward. Transparency is best served when the Act is clear, proportionate, modern, and predictable in its application. PAC represents consultant lobbyists and in-house practitioners working in the public and private sectors, nonprofits, unions, and professional and industry associations. Many of our members engage with federal and provincial lobbying acts regularly and are committed to full compliance. To inform our decision, PAC conducted a confidential survey of members with direct experience under the Federal Lobbying Act and other acts. While not statistically representative, it provides practical insight into how the Act operates day to day. Plusieurs constats résultant
Several themes emerged. First, there is strong support for transparency. Respondents consistently agreed that public disclosure of lobbying activity is essential to maintaining trust in federal institutions.
L'institution fédérale. At the same time, respondents highlighted ongoing ambiguity, in key statutory concepts such as significant part of duties, arranged communications, and grassroots lobbying, which can lead to inconsistent interpretation and compliance risk. Respondents also raised concerns about proportionality. Certain reporting requirements, including monthly communication reports, can be administratively burdensome without always delivering the commensurate transparency benefits, particularly for smaller and nonprofit organizations. Some members also warned of a potential chilling effect where uncertainty or expanded obligations may discourage engagement with government or deter volunteer participation in government governance roles. Enfin, plusieurs ont souligné.
Finally, respondents pointed to a disconnect between the Act and modern practice, given the routine use of virtual meetings and digital communications.
Feedback, PAC recommends clarifying key definitions, modernizing the Act to reflect current communication practices, reassessing proportionality, and emphasizing substantive transparency over technical errors, aligning statute and guidance, and focusing enforcement on unregistered or bad faith lobbying. In closing, PAC thanks the committee for its leadership. We believe the Lobbying Act can be strengthened in a way that enhances transparency while supporting responsible and inclusive participation in Canada's democratic process. Thank you, merci, et je serai heureux de répondre à vos questions.
Thank you. I look forward to your questions. Thank you. Mr. Cooper, you have 6 minutes.
Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses, but given what is happening right now in the House, in the face of an unprecedented motion in which this Liberal government is abusing its power to gut committees to do their job, to hold this government to account, I want to speak to that.
Monsieur Cooper, je crois que présentement, on est en train de faire l'étude. Je pense que vous êtes en dehors du sujet. Je veux dire, on a des témoins ici, puis c'est pas...
Madam Chair, it's my time.
Madame la Présidente, j'ai le droit de parole.
Before, have we had a Prime Minister, as part of a strategy, seek to secure an illegitimate majority government that he didn't earn at the ballot box through undemocratic floor crossings? That has happened. It's happened in the past.
Madame Nathan?
This is out of the scope of what we are doing here today, so I will get back to questioning the witnesses, please.
Actually, it falls perfectly within the scope of this committee because at the end of the day, this committee is an oversight committee. That is the primary responsibility of this committee. And what we are seeing right now play out in the House is a motion that the Liberal government has put forward that would gut the ability of this committee to do its job.
Please come back on topic, please. There was a point of order. I would like for you to come back to the topic at hand. We have 2 witnesses with us. We are studying the Lobbying Act. So I'm going to ask you to come back to topic, or else I'm going to give the floor to someone else.
This committee has an oversight responsibility. It's a very important responsibility. There are serious questions about a potential conflict of interest involving the finance minister over his role in directing billions of tax dollars.
Point d'ordre, Madame la Présidente, s'il vous plaît, parce que là, depuis tout à l'heure...
Point of order, Chair. Mr. Sari? I just want to perhaps explain what or take a moment with this point of order. We have witnesses here with interesting experience, and we want to hear from them. Out of respect for these witnesses, let's ask them questions. The chair called you back to order. We have asked you to ask questions of the witnesses, if only to respect their time. And so, Madam Chair, for the umpteenth time, can we ask Mr. Cooper to ask questions on the study at hand and not speak to everything and anything else that is happening in the House? If we want to know what's going on in the House, we can look on the website. We're focusing on a specific topic. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for having me here at this committee. We're neighbors, and but it's the first time that we're together at a committee. Chair, I'm uncomfortable. I've been here for almost 5 years. I don't want to say that your approach is authoritarian, but the member has 6 minutes. A member has 6 minutes for their questions. I know that you have to bring us back to order. Sometimes our preamble can be a little long, but we come back to the question at hand. We are, in fact, looking at the Lobbying Act. Generally, it's the official opposition that is chairs this committee. And so talking about an institutional change that could have an impact even in the midst of this study, it is relevant to bring this up as long as the colleague uses his preamble to ask a relevant question to the witness. I don't want to say that your reaction was a little premature, but I think that he should have the time to ask his question. He's an experienced colleague. I've worked with him in the past. He often comes back to the topic at hand, and you should give him a chance. Thank you for your comments. I will ask Mr. Cooper to continue with his questioning, but I would like to ask that you ask questions of the witnesses as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as I was saying before, Liberal members, as they always do, run interference to cover for the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister and questions around his potential conflict of interest, that in addition to there being issues around a potential conflict involving the Finance Minister, we know that there are serious questions about the most conflicted Prime Minister in Canadian history. There is an ethics screen that is supposedly in place, but we don't know how often it is triggered. We don't know who the Prime Minister is meeting with. We know that the Ethics Commissioner told the Prime Minister to stay away from Brookfield, and yet since the Ethics Commissioner provided him with that direction, the Prime Minister has repeatedly done exactly the opposite, meeting with Brookfield on multiple occasions. 2 days after the election, the Prime Minister met with a Brookfield company that was captured by the screen. On May 6th, the Prime Minister met with the CEO of Brookfield Infrastructure in Washington, D.C.
Point d'ordre, Madame la Présidente. Je suis désolé si je coupe le clip de M.
Chair. I will be cutting off Mr. Cooper again, and I am trying to give him a chance. I agree that Mr. Cooper is experienced, but I would like for us to come back to the topic at hand. We have talked about everything except today's topic.
About the Lobbying Act, and here we're talking about lobbying the Prime Minister, including individuals representing companies that were captured by the ethics screen. So all of this is to say is that it provides some context for the important role that this committee has in providing oversight and holding the Prime Minister and other officials in this government accountable in the face of what we have going on right now in the House, which is a government that is abusing its illegitimate majority to stack committees to shut down accountability. including oversight committees. And we know the important role that oversight committees have played in getting answers and uncovering conflicts, corruption, and mismanagement with this Liberal government, whether that be the We Charity scandal, the Green Slush Fund scandal, foreign interference, Winnipeg Labs, Arrive scam, and the list goes on.
Juste, Madame la Présidente, point d'ordre, s'il vous plaît, Madame la Présidente.
Another point of order, please, Chair. I think that, well, the member could go up 2 floors, be in the House of Commons, and his comments would be very relevant up there. I think he mistook the room for today's meeting. We're not at the House of Commons today. Yes, Mr. Shipley. Apologies, I can't see from here.
Shipley.
Shipley. Sorry.
That's okay. It's all good.
I couldn't see, and I think this is the first time that
here.
I'm on the same committee.
Yeah, I just was in here filling in today, and I thought I was just going to be a body in a chair, but I can't sit here and let this go on without having a piece of my say here. And hopefully the clock is stopping because my good colleague here gets 6 minutes that he has rightly deserved. He's knocked on a lot of doors. He's respected his community, and he's earned the chance to sit here and speak for 6 minutes. I can't believe what's going on in here. I haven't been in this committee before, but everybody in here is trying to shut my colleague down who's worked hard, and his constituents are here to listen to him. For some reason, all the members on the other side have an issue with what he's saying. Perhaps just sit back and listen. Maybe you can learn something. But you're being awfully, awfully rude. Let the man speak. He's got 6 minutes to speak. It's his right to speak, and he should be allowed to speak.
Merci. Il lui reste 1 minute 41.
Thank you. Mr. Hardy? I'll say it in French. What's happening is exactly what we're trying to avoid. We don't want, or rather, the government does not want to hear what the opposition has to say. They're opposing themselves. They're not listening to the position of the opposition. Mr. Cooper has every right to take 6 minutes and to have his preamble. You have to stop cutting him off just because you don't agree with what he's saying. You have to listen, and you'll have your time, but he needs to have his. That's democracy. That's how it works. Thank you. Mr. Garon? Apologies, I didn't expect this to happen at this committee, but we do have a parliamentary issue here. Mr. Sari knows that I appreciate him, and I'm sure he appreciates me too. But we're not in camera here. Debates are public. Debates are televised. That's part of what Canadians and Quebecers have a right to see. And so when a colleague says something that we don't agree with, I'm just going to call back to order. I would appreciate for your point of orders to be shorter. Well, we can't accuse someone of speaking for clips. We all have our role to play here. The colleague has his role to play here. Saying to him that he's not on the right floor and that he should leave, I think you should sanction that, Madam Chair. We all have our place here on this committee. Thank you. Mr. Cooper, if you'd like to continue, you have 1 minute, 41 seconds.
Madam Chair, and I guess we're going to see a lot of this movie playing itself out in the coming months as the Liberals continue to abuse their power by shutting down debate, shutting down scrutiny, and that's exactly what the very purpose of the motion now before the House is. And it is why I wish to put on notice the following motion, that given that this committee is mandated to provide oversight of the Liberal government, the committee reject the government House Leader's plan to impose a Liberal majority on this committee, which Canadians did not elect, in order to obstruct the committee from carrying out its duty to hold the government to account, and that the committee report this matter to the House. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Il n'y a pas de débat, mais j'aimerais
There's no debate. Can you send your motion to the clerk, please?
Merci.
Thank you. You still have 35 seconds. Do you have any questions?
On va commencer. Monsieur Sari.
Mr. Sari. Thank you, Chair. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I would like to welcome our two witnesses. Thank you for being with us today. Mr. Hurley and Honorable Joe Jordan. Mr. Jordan, you were talking about recommendation number 12. I would like for us to give a bit of context regarding monthly reports to cover communications with designated public office holders. These communication reports include communications that were not planned and identify the different elements of that communication. I would like to know how such changes would have an impact, what the daily impact would be, and do you believe that they can be implemented?
Through you, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. Yeah, and I think this gets to the heart of your job as members of Parliament, because what that change does, on the heels of classifying you as DPOHs and bringing you under the Act, which is underwritten by the Criminal Code, no small thing, that change means that it used to be that the lobbyist initiate the contact. This changes it, so that if you initiate the contact, then it could be registrable. So let's say you decide there's an issue in your riding. You want to go and consult with a local company that may or may not be having a problem. If the person in the room might be registered to lobby and you start talking about something the government may or may not do, this is part of your job. You may very well find that on a website because that person has to disclose it, even though you initiated the contact. And I think members of Parliament need to give that some thought. Are you going to hand away that chunk of your parliamentary privilege? And for what reason? It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. And I would just caution members, if you're going to go down that particular road, take that, leave the initiation on the lobbyist. They're the ones that come under the Act. They're the ones that are going to pay the price if they get it wrong. By changing that one stipulation, you are essentially opening a back door to what you as MPs do that historically have been private activities in the wake of doing your job and your constitutional right to do your job without interference or hindrance as a core parliamentary privilege principle. I think that bumps up against it, and it certainly needs more discussion than we can give it here today.
Merci, honorable. Puis j'irai peut-être aussi pour Monsieur.
Thank you. And for Mr. Hurley, one of the recommendations was to remove the significant part of duties and to have registration by default for salaried lobbyists. And exceptions would be very limited. In the view of your association and your members, how would this change impact daily activities? And what would be the exemption criteria that could be implemented?
Thank you for the question. So as mentioned in my remarks and in the brief, we consulted our membership on this review and asked them a series of questions. And that was one of the specific questions, is the impact around day-to-day work. From what we saw, about half of the respondents, so we had about 24 respondents. We have a membership of about 400, and they are a mix of individuals and organizations. About half of the respondents indicated that they are currently not registered federally because they don't meet the current threshold of number of hours. So many of our registrants, or our members rather, they do lobby provincially, but they're not registered federally because they may not be engaging members of Parliament or government departments, or they are below that threshold. So changing that threshold will have a significant impact on those organizations that will now have to register. So it will be a significant impact, particularly for those smaller organizations, particularly for those that might only incidentally invite you to come to an event or want to have a meeting and so forth. So it will have an impact.
Rapidement pour vous deux, la question.
My question is a simple one for both of you. We have one of the best systems in the world. If there was an improvement to make, in 30 seconds each, if you could tell us what that improvement would be.
Well, I'll start. I think I put a lot of thought into that when I did my brief. I think that we need to move away from this lobbyists are evil and politicians are naive, because to me that's at the foundation of this legislation. But the other thing that contributes to a lot of the problems, and there's no easy fix, and I referred to it, is this one-sided compliance, which means we file our meetings. Originally, there was talked about when the act was put together that the designated public office holders also file their meetings. At the end of the month, you reconcile them, and the office can then concentrate on when there's a mismatch.
Merci beaucoup. Va falloir revenir pour la suite. Alors,
Thank you. We'll have to come back to that. Mr. Barrett. Rather, Mr. Garon. Apologies. I forgot you, neighbor. Thank you, Chair. I'm sure you would never have forgotten me on purpose. Hello to the witnesses. I'll start with you, Mr. Jordan. In your opening remarks, you talked about an employee and having that definition with a board of directors in the legislation. You have said that it needs to be clear that it only applies to this legislation, but in about 90% of the cases, this is defined by provincial legislation and not federal. Should we not then perhaps use a different word instead of having 10 different definitions?
Absolutely. I think that would probably be helpful. I think what the commissioner is rightly trying to do is eliminate the problem of corporate directors having to register as independent consultants. There's a whole legal framework that gets dragged into that. So essentially what you want to say is they get treated the same way under the rules as employees. But deeming terminology may carry, and I'm not a lawyer. It just jumped out at me that perhaps it could cause problems, and in abundance of caution, I think you've probably hit on something. Maybe come up with another word.
Donc, je comprends qu'on est capable d'atteindre l'objectif probablement.
I understand that we could perhaps use a different word. You also talked about the 5-year cooling off period. We talked about, or you mentioned removing it when there's a change in government, but I've wondered if that 5-year ban, is useful. I was part of the industry committee during the previous parliament. A former industry minister became a manager in a telecom company, isn't registered as a lobbyist, but the people from that communication company speak out. So how can we stop someone from lobbying and lobbying unethically if that's really what they want to do?
I think we're targeting the wrong people. I've been a political staffer, and knowing what the minister takes in his coffee is not a marketable skill when I go out to try and lobby. And I think there's a misconception that this industry, when I first got into it, was a Rolodex industry. It was who you knew. But it's much more than that now. And I just think when I look at people that have worked very hard in ministers' offices, regardless of what party they're with, and all of a sudden find when it's never a career, or it's a career for very few. 5 years, they can't use those skills to make a living. I mean, that really takes me back. In terms of what you're talking about, the commissioner has been very aggressive at trying to get that. You know, that people say, oh, I'm under the 20% rule, or I'm not lobbying, I'm just giving advice. And there is a series of advisory opinions that try to flush out exactly what you're talking about. But I would argue it doesn't belong in an advisory opinion. It belongs in the legislation itself. And that's something you may want to look at.
Dans le monde.
And because things are ambiguous, there are issues that people talk about with lobbyists and Nobody in this room doesn't hear from a lobbyist every now and again. They talk to us about issues that might be important to our ridings, that are necessary for us to do our jobs. But someone might come to our office, came to talk about a specific topic. We're interested in something else. We want to ask questions on that other topic, and we discuss a wide range of things. I understand in the recommendations that we want to broaden the scope so that there are disclosures on certain things that were talked about, but how can that be done? Can we force people to tell the truth? What happens if it's a member of parliament asking a question to the lobbyist and the lobbyist just happens to have something to say?
Is the challenge. I just want to point out one thing, Madam Chair. My recommendation dealt with political staff. Keep the 5-year ban on ministers. They tend to take care of themselves. I was just focusing on that level. But I guess it comes down to, does rigor equate to better? If we collect targeted information, that's good. If we collect 10 times that information, is that good? And in the example you gave, back to my point, is if you're the one that set that meeting up, right now you can have whatever conversations you want. You can ask them whatever questions you want. You can lay out government's plan, get their feedback, and whatever relationship you have with this person, that's fine. Under that change, that's no longer the case. And the person that you're having that conversation with, that you may or may not think is incompetence, may legally have to go out on a website and record what happened and in very general terms.
Mais dans un certain sens, vous connaissez le Parlement, vous savez comment.
You understand Parliament. You know how it works. Sometimes we have worked here, we know people without having any plans, and we happen to meet all the people that we wanted to meet. How can you control something like that?
When the bill came in, and I just want to say this bill came in under Prime Minister Harper. This was, and this is good legislation. It really was a step forward. But these debates happened, and what they arrived at was it's oral communication. So if I send a letter in, that doesn't count. Oral communication that's prearranged. So if I meet you in the bathroom, that's not prearranged, and it takes place. It has to be recorded, and it's initiated by the lobbyist. That's what's being changed here.
Là, c'est Monsieur Barrett.
Now it's up to you. It's your turn, Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, through the chair, to both the witnesses for being here, to our honorable former colleague, Mr. Jordan, who also I share the distinct privilege of having represented the greatest constituency in our beautiful country, Leeds-Grenville, now known as Leeds-Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes. And I'll just also quickly just express my appreciation to Mr. Jordan, through the chair, for his continued support of the United Way of Leeds and Grenville, specifically through the golf tournament that bears the name of my predecessor, Gord Brown, who, like Joe, has done like Mr. Jordan, has done a great deal to support causes in our community, and I really appreciate that ongoing awareness and what it does for the people who are in great need in our community. So, through the chair, to Mr. Jordan, thank you very much, sir. And I'll ask my first question to Mr. Jordan. With respect to shortening the ban for former designated public office holders, how would you balance that with and that I perhaps inferred that from your comments if you didn't say it directly. How would you balance that with the need to maintain confidence against the perception of a revolving door? And because there is a pejorative connotation to the term lobbyist. And though advocacy that is done for organizations, I mentioned the United Way. There's an example. Someone advocating on behalf of the United Way. Are they akin to to someone who's lobbying or advocating on behalf of a petrol company or a pharmaceutical company? Is one for one the same?
Thank you, Madam Chair, to the honourable member. I will say we could probably have this conversation at the Keystorm. I'm sure Dan Thompson would love it. But you've hit on another important issue. First, the idea that the United Way is going to have the lobbying capacity that equates with a multinational corporation. In fact, it's funny you mention United Way because that was the example that was always used when the bill was put together. How do we strike that balance so that we're not over-professionalizing the industry? And I think we're dangerously close to doing that. That we're putting in place so much compliance burden that it's only people that do this as a living are going to be able to navigate the rules. You talk to anybody in that sector, the nonprofit sector, and they'll tell you that there are grants or applications for grants that they spend more money filling out the application than the grant is worth. And this is going to just put another layer on that. I don't know what the answer is, Mr. Barrett, but I think it's useful that the committee is cognizant of that, and don't make a bill aimed at the top. Make a bill aimed across the spectrum of the kinds of people that may or may not want to talk to government about a specific issue, because each one of these recommendations is a step towards professionalizing this so that the United Way has to hire somebody like me.
And having talked about the secondary issue in my question to the primary issue of balancing the need for that public confidence when you would suggest that there should be a dynamic application of the length of time for the prohibition on lobbying in post-employment.
The thing that I think Canadians need to understand is that under the Ethics Conflict of Interest Act, there's this very strict post-employment rules for people that are in a minister's office in terms of you can't change sides. They will look at someone's situation and you get a letter saying you can't talk to people that you had significant dealings with in that position for a period of 1 or 2 years. They also say that there is a lifetime prohibition on you using information that you obtained in that position to better yourself. Those rules already exist. Throwing another set on top and making it a 5-year ban, people may sleep better at night, but you haven't altered the situation at all. I think bringing those two pieces together and making sure that has the appropriate authority and whatnot, I think that's more than enough, really.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Saini.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan and Mr. Hurley. Mr. Jordan, in your opening statement, you were talking about recommendation number 11, but then due to that shortage of time, you had to let it go. I would like to hear your viewpoint on that.
I apologize to the committee. You put a former politician and a former teacher in a room with a microphone, they're going to go over their time. I actually cut a bunch out. Yes, thank you for the question. Essentially what this recommendation would expand the number of people that fall under the DPOH category. Right now, it's essentially ADM and above. So that if you're meeting underneath that decision-making level within the civil service, you have to be registered to engage in that activity, but you don't have to file monthly communications reports. And the original legislation made that distinction, that they were targeting. They know they can't collect everything, so they targeted senior decision makers as the ones. And over time, there's a sense of trying to broaden that net and catch more people in there. I would have to be convinced that having potentially 900 more communication reports filed every month into that office is going to provide more transparency for Canadians. It might just be a fog of data that nobody can interpret. Back to my other point, because they're only reconciling one side of the equation, and I'm not suggesting that change, but all the information that goes into that system is provided by lobbyists. We're the ones that provide it. The lobby commissioner's investigative capacities are very limited. They check the newspaper to see if somebody's at an event, and then they may follow up. They can, ask you to provide your meeting records. Incidentally, you don't have to give them, but they can ask you for them to see if they can reconcile, do a spot audit. But it's not a very good system in terms of how you catch the bad actors. And I think that's one of the things Mr. Hurley was talking about in his remarks.
Also in Commissioner recommendation number 5, that he would like to change the registration to a 10-day period compared to the current 2 months. Would you have your views on that issue? Or do you think it's effective?
Whatever it is, I'll follow it. I don't have a problem with it, with changing the timeline. I provide a compliance function within one of the firms I contract with, and I tell them, like, if you have a meeting, file the comms report the next day. Don't wait till the 15th of the next month. So in terms of those filing deadlines, I assume the commissioner has a rationale for that. And my experience with the lobby community is that you make the rules, we'll follow the rules. As long as they're clear. So I guess I have no issue with changing those deadlines at all.
Mr. Hurley, the Commissioner has recommended clarifying that the board members, partner and sole proprietors count as employees of their organization for registration purposes. Does your association see this as a helpful clarification? And if there are other areas of uncertainty that should be cleaned up at the same time?
Thanks. Thank you for the question. So we're basing our position here on the feedback we received from the members who completed the survey, and it did come up in a couple of instances, and I think I had in a couple of cases contradictory views with respect to board directors. But I would lean towards what Mr. Jordan has said with respect to providing that clarification for board directors, so that they don't have to file 2 separate filings. I think the concern comes up when you are dealing with, again, smaller organizations, nonprofits. United Way is an excellent example of that. There's the balance between transparency and also the burden that it places not only on the sometimes very limited staff capacity you have with nonprofits, but also with attracting board members to be on that. So some board directors may not feel comfortable being part of that. The principle is right; it's the right one, but it's ensuring that you have the right balance when you are going to communicate that. And it comes down, and to your other point too, with respect to the time frames and so forth. Usually that's an issue when an organization or a consultant lobbyist is initiating an undertaking or beginning their lobbying. It's important in terms of the education and ensuring that you have compliance and awareness, that you allow enough time for these organizations that may not have ever had to file before to ensure that they come into compliance in a timely manner.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, Monsieur Garon, pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Garon, you have 2.5 minutes. I'm a little bit confused. Mr. Sari earlier said that we have one of the best systems in the world, so how can we improve it? That was his question at the end of his turn. Now you're saying, and you said it in English, but I'll be saying it in French, you're saying that we don't have, or the system is not great. Are we the best or are we not?
Here, but it can always be improved.
Pouvez-vous me définir ça? Top tier, pouvez-vous me définir ce que c'est?
Can you define what top tier is? Are we top 2, top 20, top 50, top 100? Are we with Zimbabwe, the EU?
The OECD used in their report, and I have the link to the report. I can provide it. I don't have their absolute definition, but they listed, and it's very detailed. But it's what they're evaluating is the framework, and the framework is very good. What I'm trying to say is that in practice, sometimes things fall through the cracks.
Le temps est quelque chose d'assez rare qu'on est la deuxième opposition. Par exemple,
we are the second opposition party, and you talked about resources. We have a prime minister with a complete floor that is dedicated to managing his conflicts of interest. This is just someone who, in his past life, knows so many people that regardless of where he goes, it's presumed that there's lobbying happening. And so it's important to manage that appropriately. We assume that he's doing it, but we don't have any proof of that. Do you believe that verifications by the Prime Minister's office, do you believe that other tasks for the lobbying commissioner might end up with not enough resources?
Well, if you're going to bring DGs into the tent, they won't have enough resources for sure. But I think there probably are ways to target compliance. I talked about dual reporting. Maybe you could have dual reporting in certain offices. If you think, clearly as you go up the pyramid, you would assume that the decision-making that's going on at that level is closer to the decision. And if you're going to focus unlimited or limited resources, that might be a way to do it. So, I rarely agree with Duff Conacher, but I mean, I think the idea of taking another look at that dual reporting system, where if certain ministries, finance, you know them as well as I do, that are closer to the action than others, certainly public works, procurement, you could implement limited dual reporting there.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. Oui, c'est vrai que ça passe vite. Alors, ce serait
It's
Monsieur
true,
Hardy.
time goes quickly. Mr. Hardy, now you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us today. There are a lot of interesting things happening here. We can agree on the fact that lobbying is very important. Often, people who are sharing their interests know a lot more about it than decision makers or MPs, and so we need to be in contact with people who truly understand their industries and their interests. But I'll come back to what you said on the OECD. They were here last week, as it happens, and they said that we were top tier and everything was great, but we asked them a very clear question. Theoretically, we're checking boxes, but in practice, are things going that well? They said that they couldn't assess that. So on paper, we're doing great. But there are some limitations anyway. And earlier you said that there is legislation and you have knowledge of the industry before and after. You shouldn't have access to information, but we are seeing things happen that could be a potential conflict of interest. And so when I'm looking at what's happening now, what would be, and I want to be clear here, what would be efficient and reduce red tape? How could we have a better control on lobbying? We want to understand industries so that decision makers can make decisions for the best interest of Canadians.
To me? That's a big question. I'm going to default to my testimony in 2014, where I'm going to go back to 2008. I said, one of the problems I saw with this bill was the definition of what is lobbying is you could sideswipe a semi-truck through some of the loopholes there. That a better definition might be people that communicate with decision makers to affect outcomes. If that's the definition of what lobbying is, a lot of this trying to get at it through indirectly, which is a lot of what we're seeing with, and I'm not faulting the commissioner. The commissioner is working with the tools that are in her toolbox. But I think if we could introduce clarity to what the rules actually are, you've got a better chance of finding out if somebody's on the wrong side of them.
À ce moment-là, est-ce que si on regarde, parce que
lobbying on the one hand, and we know that ethics is on the other. Should there not be a balance in having very clear lobbying in one's intentions? And if there's an appearance or true conflict of interest, well, there can be penalties, severe penalties, so that people can be caught if they're doing this in a problematic way. And we saw that in the Maritimes, an air turbine project, and it was Liberal family members. it was problematic, and so we had to wonder, was it lobbying that was the issue, or was it ethics? And so we need proper lobbying legislation and ethics legislation so that we can properly spend taxpayer dollars.
I mean, I don't want to be part of a profession that somehow ethics is outside of. I've long advocated that the lobby commissioner and ethics commissioner should be the same person. But barring that, I think at least the rules there should be some kind of harmonization between what they are, because it's a little confusing. Since this act became law in 2008, there's been 4 people convicted under this act. And one of the reasons why I think that's a low number is because it's so complicated. The rules are so complicated. You've got the act, you've got advisory opinions. I'm sure in the briefs you find people complaining the 32 hours to 8 hours. That's a significant change. That was made through an advisory opinion. It wasn't made through this committee. It wasn't made through the legislature. It wasn't made through Parliament. But she has no other option. So it's the complex nature of it, I think, hurts its enforcement. And adding more layers to that doesn't help.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you, and thank you to both the witnesses today. A lot of the questions I have here have been answered, but I do have this question on recommendation 3. At making a communications about government contracts registrable for in-house lobbyists with exclusions for established procurement processes. Can this be done in a way that improves transparency without creating an unworkable burden, particularly for smaller organizations? And maybe Mr. Jordan could answer it, and Mr. Hurley after.
That wasn't one I highlighted, but I'll just say this. One of the things I struggle with when we talk about in-house in-house organizations and their interactions with government is one of the biggest consumers in the country. 30 billion? I don't know what you spend on goods and services every year. So it'd be nice. I would like to understand the difference between what is sales and what is lobbying. Because if I have a company that makes widgets and I want to go convince the government they should buy the incredible Jordan widget, is that lobbying, or is that me as an entrepreneur trying to put food on my family's table? So I guess it's the lack of definition, which is joined at the hip with a no lack of clear objective when you go down these roads. That I've been in this business over 20 years, that I still have a hard time understanding it.
And I'll just add to that. It goes back to what we were talking about around clarity, and especially for organizations. I think, again, in the nonprofit social sector that depend on seeking grants or seeking funding from government. Part of the role, you have the formal process around whether it's RFPs or whether it's formal, say, the Canada Arts Council, where there's a formal process. But there's also, every organization has the challenge of building awareness of their mission of their organization. What is the purpose of their organization? And they meet with all of you. They meet with your colleagues to make that, to make them aware of what they do, so that maybe that's not the intent of the meeting or that first engagement, but it might be later on when they go to make a case for funding. So I think clarity around that is really important, especially if you are looking to engage more organizations who will be required to lobby. And the more clarity you can provide to that, and as clear of a process how they are to comply with their reporting in those instances, is really key as the Act moves forward.
And how do you see the other levels of government trying to ask from the government of things like infrastructure and things that they need? How does that fit into lobbying?
The provincial governments are exempt from the Act, as are Indigenous communities. So they thought of that when they put it together. But you're right. There's a tremendous amount of activity there that isn't captured. But clearly, they've decided that's not in the public interest to capture and report on that. But the Act does have a very narrow list of entities that are completely exempt from the Act, so they don't have to go through all those steps. Now, having said that, a lot of the provinces are mirroring the federal legislation, and just not to pump their tires, but I'll tell you something about our lobby commissioner's office. A, their computer system works, and I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that to joke. Their computer system works, and it works well. Two, that the provinces have copied a lot of what they do, so that there's a lot of similarity. If I register at this province or federally, it's making my life easier to do that. And they focus on compliance, not prosecution. When they get involved, their objective is to let's make sure you understand the rules so we can get you into compliance. They don't come in swinging and trying to cause people grief. They take a nicer approach, and I think it's a better approach.
Il reste 20 secondes, 20 seconds.
Well, I was going to ask if there's 3 things that you could recommend, like your top 3 that could make this act better. But I don't think that you could do that in 20 seconds. So maybe if you're going to do a submission or something like that, maybe you could make some recommendations for us. Thank you so much for your time.
Au nom des parlementaires,
Thank you. On behalf of parliamentarians, thank you for being with us today, and thank you for your testimonies. It's greatly appreciated. We're going to suspend. Thank you.
To the second hour, and we have got de lobbyisme de Québec, Jean-François Routier, le commissaire au lobbyisme. And we've also got from the Office of the Integrity Commissioner of Ontario, Catherine Motherwell, who is the Integrity Commissioner of Ontario. Welcome back to committee. It wasn't that long ago that you were here, Mr. Motherwell. So, Monsieur Routier, tu vas commencer aujourd'hui.
Mr. Routier, you're going to be starting us off. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members. Thank you for inviting me. As Quebec's lobbying commissioner, I am pleased to address you today to contribute to your deliberations on the reform of the Federal Lobbying Act. I will be speaking to you in French, but I am available to answer your questions in both official languages. I would first like to emphasize the importance of the work you are undertaking. Revising a law governing lobbying is a demanding, sometimes unpopular, but all the more fundamental exercise, given the current state of the world, which shows us just how essential the role of institutions safeguarding public integrity is. I encourage you to carry out your work with the ambition of achieving the best possible outcome in the interest of the right to transparency for the citizens that we all serve. I commend the Federal Commissioner's willingness to update her legislation. Proposing a modernization of the legislative framework is a delicate exercise, requiring a balance between transparency requirements and their relevance to adequately informing the public. Unfortunately, I will not have the opportunity to comment on each of the Commissioner's recommendations before you. My remarks will therefore be limited to supporting certain of her key policy directions, which we consider essential to the effectiveness of any modern lobbying regulatory framework. The first issue concerns the question of reporting thresholds, specifically the concept of significant party, which the Commissioner wishes to replace with the default registration requirement. In Quebec, this concept of a significant party has been criticized for many years, particularly by the Lobbying Commissioner. In its recent report, the Gallant Commission identified it as a fundamental issue regarding transparency and public integrity, making it the key element of recommendation number 25, which calls for reform of Quebec's lobbying regulatory framework. This recommendation led on February 17th, 2026 to the adoption of a unanimous motion by the National Assembly recognizing the need for a comprehensive review of Quebec's law, particularly to eliminate the minimum activity threshold it contains. For us, the conclusion is clear. Any threshold for the application of the law based on the duration, intensity, or frequency of communications is nearly impossible to apply, verify, and enforce. It creates a persistent gray area that undermines the transparency sought and unduly complicates the enforcement of the law. In our view, the transparency requirement should be triggered based on the relevance of the communications of influence, the individuals to whom they are addressed, and the subjects covered, rather than on an arbitrary measure of the intensity of the communications. Consequently, we believe it would be a major mistake to enshrine the concept of compiled hours in law. In our view, Canadians and Quebecers deserve an honest assessment and a well-considered solution to this very real enforcement issue. The second issue I wish to address concerns the lack of regulation of lobbying by companies seeking contracts with the federal government, particularly contracts awarded by mutual agreement. Experience shows that lobbying activities frequently take place prior to and in parallel with public contracting processes, and that they have a significant impact on contracts awarded through private negotiations. Currently, these lobbying communications fall completely outside the scope of the federal legislation. Thus, although the federal system is sometimes presented as one of the best in the world, this obvious gap is too often overlooked, a gap that deprives citizens of transparency regarding lobbying activities, where the awarding of public contracts certainly involves expenditures of several $billions each year. This lack of regulation constitutes a major issue that, in our view, must be addressed. I would like to emphasize on one final aspect of the Federal Commissioner's proposals, the strengthening of the range of powers and sanctions at her disposal. Our experience shows, and the OECD has confirmed, that a system relying almost exclusively on criminal investigations and penalties is ineffective and has little deterrent effect, in addition to being cumbersome and costly. Proportionate administrative powers that can be applied flexibly are essential to promote compliance, quickly correct violations, and ensure the credibility of the supervisory authority. This is an approach we strongly support. Genuine investigative and enforcement powers granted to the Commissioner are therefore essential, but they can only be fully effective if accompanied by a shift in accountability toward the companies and organizations on whose behalf lobbying is conducted. In this spirit, holding entities rather than the individuals acting on their behalf accountable for obligations and sanctions is, in our view, an inevitable development. In summary, as noted in the OECD report published in 2022 on Quebec's legislation, several of whose recommendations and conclusions have been presented to you, we maintain that an effective reform should in particular eliminate arbitrary thresholds, strengthen organizational accountability, and provide the regulator with a range of appropriate powers to promote transparency and compliance. These recommendations extend far beyond the context of Quebec, and I hope they will also contribute to your deliberations. Thank you for your attention, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Monsieur Routier.
You next. You have 5 minutes to address the committee. Please start.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today. I am pleased to appear with my colleague from Quebec, Commissioner Routier. My remarks today will parallel his in that I'm going to be speaking to Ontario's legislation and the experience with the Lobbyist Registration Act, but I will be speaking to some of the recommendations that Commissioner Bélanger has made regarding the Lobbying Act in order to highlight the similarities between the Ontario and federal systems. In the interest of time, I'll make brief remarks on the following topics: the registration threshold for the in-house lobbyist category, the need to ensure conduct rules apply to all types of lobbyists, and I'll talk about additional compliance measures or penalties. So the Ontario legislation appoints the Integrity Commissioner as the lobbyist registrar. I am independent and I am nonpartisan. My office maintains a public record of lobbyists who are lobbying the Ontario government. The registry currently has more than 4,000 registrations. These reflect the work of 3,800 lobbyists and approximately 2,500 businesses and organizations. Like the federal legislation, registration is required for consultant lobbyists who represent clients and for in-house lobbyists who work for-profit and not-for-profit entities that engage in lobbying. Ontario does not require monthly communication reports, and the Act does provide me with investigative powers. If I find a contravention, I can impose a limited number of penalties. So Commissioner Bélanger's first submission to this committee addresses the registration threshold for in-house lobbyists. In Ontario, there is a 50-hour registration threshold, and it works like this. The senior officer of a business or organization is required to register when the combined number of hours that employees or paid directors and officers spend lobbying Ontario public office holders reaches 50 hours in a 12-month period. So the 50-hour threshold came into effect following legislative amendments in 2016 here in Ontario. Before that, the threshold mirrored the current federal legislation, significant part of duties. When Ontario switched to the 50-hour threshold, it resulted in a steady increase in the number of in-house registrations. There are now 50% more in-house registrations than we saw in 2016. I am of the view that more registrations means more transparency on who is lobbying government and about what. As you know, this is a cornerstone of lobbying regulation. In fact, in 2021, my predecessor, J. David Wake, called for a further reduction in the registration threshold in Ontario. As you will appreciate, with 50 hours, as I mentioned, it's anything below that level. A lot of lobbying can take place in 49 hours. And 49 hours of lobbying without any requirement to register runs counter to the goal of transparency. By way of comparison, consultant lobbyists are required to register when they make even one phone call, email, or request for a meeting. And that's why I echo Commissioner Wake's recommendation to reduce the threshold further in Ontario, and I also support Commissioner Bélanger's recommendation to eliminate the significant part of duties registration threshold federally. She has also recommended that the Federal Code of Conduct apply to all lobbyists, as well as senior officers. Ontario does not have a lobbyist code of conduct, but we do have an important conduct requirement in the Act that prohibits any consultant or in-house lobbyist from placing a public office holder in a real or potential conflict of interest. If lobbying regulation includes rules of conduct, like a conflict of interest rule or a gift offering rule, it should apply consistently for all individuals who are lobbying or who are directing the lobbying activity. My office has also recommended amendments to the Ontario legislation to strengthen and make consistent the provisions related to the conduct of lobbyists. Finally, Commissioner Belanger has also recommended amendments to allow for the range of additional compliance measures, including mandatory training, administrative monetary penalties, and temporary prohibitions on lobbying. In Ontario, if I find that someone has breached the Act, there are 2 penalties I can impose. I can name them publicly, I can prohibit them from lobbying for up to 2 years, or I can do both. It's worth noting that in the almost 10 years of investigations, the Ontario Registrar has issued 1 prohibition on lobbying, and the Registrar has named 11 lobbyists for contraventions of the Act. In closing, I do thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today, and I would be pleased, like my colleague from Quebec, to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Motherwell. On va commencer avec nos premiers
We're
tours.
going to start with our first round of questions. Mr. Hardy from the Conservative Party will start with 6 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I have a lot of questions for you. I find this topic extremely important. Lobbying is necessary. We know that. As MPs, we don't know everything. We don't know everything about all industries, and so we need to have a balance, and we need to hear from those who truly understand the needs of industry. And then when understanding all of this means that you need to go through a business in order to have access to public funding, well, we need to focus on this as well. And so my question is for Monsieur Routier. 99% of businesses in Quebec are small businesses, and a similar percentage in Canada. Is the legislation not so complicated that these small businesses are giving up on speaking to government representatives, and now it's only the 1% of businesses who are very rich who can pay for lobbying and pay for these lobbying firms? Do you find that the legislation is too cumbersome? I don't think so. There are different things that we can do. Firstly, and what we did a few years ago, is that we replaced the lobbying register to have a platform that was much easier to use. It takes under 15 minutes now to register. It can be done over the phone. It can be done in a minister's office as well. So there's the technology aspect of it and the practicality of it. In Quebec, we have 1,500 businesses and organizations that have active mandates. There are over 5,000 lobbying activities that are registered every day, and about 1,500 businesses who have that kind of mandate, and 5,600 lobbyists. And so we have a lot of small businesses that are registered and who report their lobbying activities. But I do think that the legislation can be simplified. I do understand your point of view. Legislation should be simplified. I think that we need to focus on relevant activities to the public. That's a bit what I said. This significant part of duties does not talk about what is relevant for the public. As my colleague Catherine mentioned, it omits that 49 hours. So we don't focus on the most relevant activities and the designated public office holders. That's the issue with that significant part of duties. And earlier you said something interesting. Lobbying in order to receive grants, that's covered by the legislation, but lobbying for receiving a contract, that is not covered by the Act. Do you believe that that's logical, knowing that this is taxpayer dollars that is going to be spent? If I'm doing lobbying with the federal government in order to receive a contract, that I don't have to follow the legislation and make things public, does that make any sense? I don't think it makes sense. In Quebec, if we're dealing with a consultant lobbyist or if it's a business, in Quebec, there are both, and it's 14% of these mandates that are focused on contracts, and so it's quite significant. It's significant for funding as well. So receiving a contract from the government is important, yes, for contracts and for grants and funding. There is a gap currently in the federal legislation, and it is an issue because there's no transparency for contracts when we're dealing with businesses who are carrying out these activities. And now, if I make the link between lobbying and ethics, we know that whether it be the lobbying or the ethics commissioner, they should have the opportunity or the ability to enforce penalties. Should the lobbying commissioner or the ethics commissioner, as soon as they note that something happened that shouldn't have, that there should be a significant penalty to deter problematic behavior? Is this something that we should focus on with those penalties? Yes, absolutely. In Quebec, we have an additional power. We have disciplinary penalties. We can suspend a lobbyist's activities if they infringed upon the legislation. Otherwise, we are similar to the federal legislation, but we can have investigations, but the federal commissioner needs to send her investigations to the RCMP, which leads to additional costs and delays. I think that it's very relevant to have a complete understanding. Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Madame Lapointe from the Liberal Party, you have the floor for the next 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. There was a press conference earlier today that I was at with you and Mr. Hardy. I mentioned things that I should not have. I just wanted to say that. Now, moving on to questions for the witnesses. My question is for both commissioners. Thank you for being with us today. Your legislations, do they focus on grassroots lobbying? If so, can you tell me more about it, please?
C'est ce que je veux dire.
Do you understand what I mean? Ms. Carolyn? Catherine, rather?
Thank you. Yes, so we do have grassroots in our legislation, but it's a form of communication, and you have to identify it if it's going to be part of the way in which you're proposing to communicate with a public office holder. So we actually have a checkbox that says, are you going to be communicating via letter? Are you going to be communicating in a meeting? Are you going to be embarking on grassroots lobbying? And as you know, grassroots can use by any means, including ads, websites, social media. And it's essentially what it is to encourage members of the public then to communicate with public office holders directly through any means, including letters, email, social media, etc. In Ontario, only managing a grassroots communication is considered lobbying. Excuse me. And examples of this type of lobbying are directing a campaign, for example, making decisions about the message of a campaign, making decisions about the techniques that would be used as part of that campaign, as I said, which is to get members of the public then to communicate with a public office holder. Administrative work And research to support a campaign is not considered part of lobbying activity in Ontario. And if a client pays a lobbyist to manage that grassroots communication, then they must register as a consultant lobbyist. Finally, if in another example, if an in-house lobbyist manages grassroots communications for their employer, the senior officer may need to register that lobbying, again, if the 50-hour threshold is met. And that's a summary of what exists in our legislation.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Routier.
Thank you. Monsieur Routier? For the grassroots, or for grassroots lobbying, we don't have that as a disclosure requirement in Quebec, but it is something that we would like to see added. We have the registry that includes voluntary disclosure, and so that focuses on grassroots lobbying if it is used. Thank you very much. How do your respective legislations define moral entities and organizations, and how does this compare with the federal legislation?
Monsieur Routier, et ensuite.
Mr. Routier first, please.
Les personnes morales.
For legal entities, only a few nonprofits are covered by our legislation. The notice of the organizations are limited. We're focused on lobbyists and not entities, and that's one of the major changes that we've been proposing. The OECD mentioned it as well. This is something that we're looking for in the Quebec legislation, and it's also something requested by the federal commissioner. Thank you.
Aimeriez-vous répondre sur cette question-là? Oui.
Would you like to respond?
Just so I'm clear on the question, are you asking to compare what the Ontario legislation says about not-for-profits versus other entities?
En fait, les personnes morales et les organisations.
Legal entities and organizations, if your definition is the same as the federal government.
Thank you. They're all in-house organizations or in-house for-profit, not-for-profit. It is the same. The requirements are identical. So again, they're captured under the 50-hour threshold, after which then registration is required in the name of the senior officer. The registration must then list all those who have contributed to that 50 hours as being active lobbyists on behalf of the organization, again, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit.
Merci. Juste pour être certaine que j'avais...
Thank you. Just to ensure that I've understood correctly, in the 50 hours for your threshold, this is for emails, letters, meetings, and telephone conversations, correct?
That meets the definition of lobbying, which is communication with an intent to influence, provided it is part of that individual's job and they're paid for it.
Merci, Madame Lapointe.
Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. Next question. Mr. Garon, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to both commissioners for being with us today. We talked about lobbying and public contracts, that there's a gap in the federal legislation and it's not covered. We are reviewing the legislation now. It doesn't necessarily mean that the act will be reviewed at the end of this. We're just consulting, but in Quebec, we have often noticed significant issues with our legislation on lobbying and with compliance, and we noticed that the most with infrastructure projects. For example, with the Charbonneau Commission, scandals in construction and roads. And now we have this gap in the federal legislation. And now we've got issues with pipelines, rails, high-speed rail, military spending, military bases, fighter planes. These are significant contracts. Is it not urgent to close this gap as quickly as possible before moving on with supplying these major infrastructure projects in the short term?
Commissaire Routier.
Mr. Routier? I can't speak to the projects for the federal government, but I'm speaking about the vulnerability with these larger infrastructure projects and gaps in the federal legislation. If you read the Gallant Commission report, that was raised. These major projects in Quebec with ETHI, we noticed that there was no specific mandate awarded for SACLIC. In that context, public office holders and Quebecers were not informed regarding that major project, which was that SACLIC platform. As I stated, this is an improvement that is necessary for the federal legislation. There's a lot of influence that can happen in contracts. I think that we need to frame things in a smart way. There needs to be a threshold that would be acceptable for Canadians. And perhaps if lobbying goes beyond that threshold, then it would be more relevant as well. Framing lobbying needs to be based on the relevance of information for Canadians so that they can make informed choices. And a complementary question. Currently, there is no threshold. We have nothing. So it can only be improved. That's what's great. Do you believe that we should also frame that kind of lobbying for crown corporations and, for example, Via Rail, Alto? Should it go that far? Perhaps you should ask the question to the federal commissioner. And these crown corporations that can be included. In Quebec, all of the crown corporations, organizations, and departments, and we cover municipal organizations as well, they're covered by our legislation. And so the definition of lobbying applies in all cases. Thank you, Commissioner. Did you say that you support the federal commissioner having more powers, for example, carrying out an investigation and imposing penalties? Can you tell us more on the type of powers that can be given to a commissioner that would allow him or her to better implement their legislation? Of course. Having the power to investigate and concluding that there should be penalties is a good idea. We can speak to the director of proceedings, which is costly and takes a lot of time, and it needs to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the same thing for the federal commissioner, if I understood correctly. But we can also apply prohibitions to lobbyists here. No, go ahead, sorry. We are also asking to have recommendation powers, administrative penalties as well, and monetary penalties when there are activities that were not registered, or we need to have a wide range of tools in our toolkits, and this can be given to commissioners, especially when they are independent. Thank you, Mr. Garon. This completes the first round of questions. We're going to move on to our second round. 5 minutes. We're going to start with Mr. Barrett from the Conservative Party.
You have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank
you, Chair. Commissioner Motherwell, which Ontario enforcement tool has done the most, in your opinion, to improve compliance? And would you view that as a tool that Parliament should adopt for the federal commissioner?
I don't have many. So there's not much to choose from, really, but perhaps I could give you an overview of what it looks like, and then you could have a sense of where there is a distinct difference between the powers that I do have under the Lobbyist Registration Act and those that Commissioner Belanger has. So I have the power to investigate potential noncompliance with the Act. I can open an investigation on my own initiative. I can take complaints from anyone in the community. So this means that we can take it all in. The Act is also very specific, though, about what can be done as far as the procedures and processes that must be followed under the investigation. These are very helpful. I can also then conduct compliance activities to verify information that is contained in individual registrations. And I can tell you we do easily in the hundreds, many hundreds of 300, 400 compliance investigations just to make sure that to validate the information that's provided to us. My office also cannot divulge any information on whether there is an investigation or make an investigative report public. The results of investigations are anonymously summarized in the annual reports. I would like to have some changes made to this aspect of it because I can only report once a year in my annual report. I would like to make that a little bit more timely so that if whatever reporting is permitted by the legislature, that it at least can be in a more timely sense rather than waiting potentially 11 months and 30 days until the next annual report. If I do find noncompliance with the Act, as I said, I can impose a penalty by making public the name of the lobbyist and publishing a description of noncompliance. I can also prohibit a person found to be noncompliant from lobbying for up to 2 years. These are the only penalties that are available to me. Like Commissioner Belanger, I would like to see a little bit more a sort of opportunity because, again, one of the things that was emphasized is, I believe in Mr. Jordan's testimony, was a lot of this is about compliance. We want to help people comply with the legislation. And so maybe what they don't need is to have their name published on the website. Maybe what they really need is some training. And so it would be really helpful to be able to have that in the toolbox as well, to insist or require that someone come in for half a day of training so they really understand the breadth and scope of the law, how it applies to the activities they're undertaking, and then they're fully informed. It's better for us because it's a better use of resources. Education is a key part of a lot of our work, and then it's also better for the individual because then they fully understand what where their breach laid and how they can fix their activities. Does that help?
It does. If we look at the potential to expand registration requirements, how do you think that we should make sure that the Act targets professional lobbying and not legitimate advocacy by charities, nonprofits, faith organizations that are acting in the public interest and sometimes would be even volunteer driven?
That doesn't mean that they're not trying to influence public policy. And as I said in my opening remarks, the key underpinning of lobbyist registration and lobbyist registries is to ensure that there's transparency about who is lobbying whom in government and about what. It's also about protecting government decision making. And so some of those organizations that you outlined are very sophisticated organizations that, as you say, have what you may believe is a valid point on influencing public policy. We're sort of lobbying content neutral, if you will. We're not really concerned with what you're lobbying about. We want to make sure that it's clear to the public what you're lobbying about, but it's value neutral. And so if you're lobbying because you want to get a contract for your company, or if you're lobbying because it's a very important piece of social policy that you would like the government to act on, we treat those the same. And so that is that is a fundamental underpinning again of the act that I am charged with ensuring is undertaken appropriately here in Ontario.
How much time? 1, 0, -1, -2. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Saini, 5 minutes. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Saini from the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the two commissioners. One of the recommendations that the Federal Commissioner of Lobbying is seeking is immunity from civil and criminal proceeding for herself and her office. I understand that some of the other federal agencies who are reporting to the Parliament already have that. Could you give us your viewpoint on that? And could you elaborate how would that affect your office? Ms. Commissioner Motherwell?
I have similar immunity under the Members' Integrity Act, but I believe that this question is something in which I would really suggest be directed to Commissioner Belanger.
Maybe Commissioner Belanger could, speak on that.
Do you want Mr. Routier to speak on that? Okay.
Please.
Monsieur Routier.
Yes, I didn't want to impersonate Mrs. Bélanger. Donc, écoutez, nous, dans la loi...
In the Quebec legislation, there are measures to stop someone from any kind from suing the commissioner or gives them immunity. It is important in order to ensure the independence of the commissioner. They are responsible for enacting the legislation or implementing it, and so they want to focus on compliance, as my colleague was saying. That's what commissioners want to do. They want to ensure compliance and transparency. But there are penalties, and it is essential that the commissioners are entirely independent. And so they need to be protected.
The next question is for Commissioner Motherwell. How does the referral process to appropriate authority works under your legislation? Can you provide an example of referral that was recently made by your office?
Under the Act, I do have the power to refer a matter under to an appropriate body, such as the OPP. As I mentioned, though, everything that we do under the Act in an investigative capacity is confidential, and so any example I'm not able to provide. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Can you elaborate on the cooling off period set out in your respective legislation and whether any exception exists that would reduce or eliminate that period?
Je peux commencer si vous souhaitez.
I can start. There are rules in the Quebec legislation. In our case, 2 years is the longest period of time. So members of the executive, ministers, for example, have that 2-year limit. In reviewing the legislation, we would like to increase that cooling off period lightly. I wouldn't go beyond 3 years. That said, the 5 years in the federal legislation, if it meets its goals, then that's fine. But as a regulator, and after having spoken about this with designated public office holders. 5 years seems to be a long time. The lobbying commissioner in Quebec cannot limit that. I cannot adjust the time frame or lower requirements in the legislation. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
On va à Monsieur Garon.
Mr. Garon, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. It's very much appreciated. I will continue my questions for Mr. Routier. As politicians, we often meet with businesses and ministers as well. I know that in the past, La Presse covered cocktail parties for funding where ministers or members were present and people were paying to have access to ministers. How is that factored into the Quebec legislation? If there's an event that was organized and people must pay a significant amount to participate in that party, and they then have access to elected officials and ministers, do they need to register in that case? Is that considered lobbying? Paying in order to access a minister or a politician is not necessarily relevant for the lobbying legislation, but it would probably fall under the Commissioner of Ethics. And so will the person who is present at that party attempt to influence a politician's decision? If those criteria are met, then they should be registered. The circumstances are irrelevant. What's important is whether or not somebody is attempting to influence the decision of a designated public office holder, which doesn't seem to be present in the federal legislation. Some colleagues talked about grassroots lobbying. We might sometimes think that the federal government might need a lower threshold for such groups because it might be difficult to register. Earlier, you also mentioned that the process for registration is simpler in Quebec. It takes 15 minutes. And it seems to make things easier for groups who have fewer resources as well. Is this what should be done to simplify the process first before asking everyone to register regardless of the size of the group or their financial abilities? I would say that that's what we have done in Quebec. Most nonprofits are not subject, which is different from the federal government and the other provinces. Only a few organizations are subject to the legislation, and I know that nonprofits don't want to register. Your colleague earlier talked about legitimate or illegitimate lobbying, and Ms. Motherwell said that doesn't exist. We don't look at the goals of lobbying. We can't judge that, if it's for the public good or not. And the public good, well, that can depend on who you ask. But I believe that if we want to focus on organizations who have fewer resources, we do need to find ways to allow those lobbying activities to be covered. As my colleague said, they are still lobbying. We can call it lobbying or advocacy. It's the same thing. I'm going to ask you a question. I believe I know your answer. We might have good legislation. Commissioners need to have a lot of resources to apply the legislation. Often we add resources after a crisis. Do you believe that lobbying commissioners in Canada receive enough funding? Do you believe that they should be receiving additional resources? I can't speak on behalf of the other lobbying commissioners, but I can say that for the lobbying commissioner in Quebec, we have an annual budget, and I believe that they respect the legislation. We don't have all the powers that we would like to have, and hopefully we'll get what we want in amending the legislation, but we won't necessarily require significant additional resources because we did a lot of work uphill with the registry, for example. For the federal commissioner, I can't speak to that, but in Quebec, they recognize the importance of the role played by the commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Garon.
Next, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thank the witnesses. I had a motion that I put on notice. I'm going to move it. I move that the committee require that the Privy Council office to provide the committee on the 15th day of each month with a report detailing each time an assessment was undertaken relating to the application of the Prime Minister's Conflict of Interest screen pursuant to the assessment tool on the application of the Prime Minister's Conflict of Interest screen, including assessments originating in the PCO or any department from the previous month. These reports must include 1, a summary of each instance where an assessment was triggered, 2, the record of the outcome of each analysis, 3, any records of discussions or consideration that are in the possession of the PCO or any department related to each analysis, including notes and meeting minutes, and 4, any correspondence related to each analysis, including emails, text messages, instant messages, and other records of conversations, and the first report, which shall be provided to the committee by no later than June 15, 2026, shall include the complete set of information for each assessment since the Prime Minister's Conflict of Interest screen came into effect, and B, order the production of the Prime Minister's travel itineraries and related records for all international travel he has taken since he became the Prime Minister that are in the possession of the Privy Council office, the Prime Minister's office, or any federal government department. These should include, but not be limited to, each meeting the Prime Minister attended and every attendee at these meetings, and these documents are to be provided to the committee in both official languages and without redaction within 6 weeks of the adoption of the motion, and it has been provided in both official languages to the clerk with the requisite notice.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett. The motion was put on notice. It is in order. Mr. Barrett had the floor. He moved the motion. I am going to take this opportunity to thank Commissioner Motherwell. We've got just limited time here. Commissioner Motherwell, I want to thank you for appearing before the committee today. If there are any if there is any other information that you'd like to provide to the committee, please feel free to do that. La même, Monsieur Routier, merci pour
Mr. Routier, also thank you for your testimony today.
And I'm going to go to Mr. Barrett on his motion. Mr. Barrett, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Chair. And so it's a comprehensive motion, and it is to furnish the committee with information. These are items that came up during our hearings, our public hearings on the review of the Conflict of Interest Act, as well as in the fall when we were dealing with conflicts of interest related to Brookfield, the Prime Minister's involvement with Brookfield and his holdings. And it comes down to one of the core functions of this committee, which is about accountability. It's about providing transparency for Canadians. And we have an opportunity to and I think that we actually got a reasonable response from the individuals who administer the Prime Minister's Conflict of Interest screen, his Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council, when they did offer some PCO documents with respect to when the screen is when it's been invoked, and regular reporting of that to a standing committee for which the mandate.
Mr. Chair, point of order, please. Just want to know how long the committee should take Quand est-ce que vous prévoyez que ça va...
How long
que
is
vous-
this meeting going to take? Would you? I don't understand your question. The committee was supposed to end at 6:30, at 5:30 rather. When will this meeting end? We have until 5:45. That is the resources that are available so far. I just wanted to know. So we'll hear from Mr. Barrett. I know that Mr. Sari would like to speak to the motion as well. Mr. Barrett?
Well, Chair, the option always exists for members of the committee who don't know what time it is or what time the committee started or what time it ended to ask the chair, not on mic and not on a point of order. I don't think that that would, in fact, be a point of order, but it is certainly on brand for the member opposite to have non sequitur interruptions solely for the purpose of being disruptive.
Okay, to the motion, Mr. Barrett, please.
Yep. So I think it's important that when we're in committee that points of order reflect the standing orders, and that point of order did not reference the standing orders, and so it was out of order. And I'll take the opportunity to identify that because it was disruptive to the committee, which is also contrary to the standing orders. To the matter at hand, though, this is important. This is an accountability committee. And what we're seeing is that we have the opportunity to bring accountability to bear. And we've been successful in doing that with accountability committees over the last few years. And many times we've heard from Liberal members that there's nothing to see here, and so that we don't need to discuss it. We don't need document production orders. We don't need to have witness testimony. And what have we got when we have had fulsome investigations, when committees have fulfilled their mandates? Well, we've uncovered corruption in government with the Liberal government. We have uncovered matters that have led to criminal charges being laid against government contractors when Liberal members had said there was nothing to see there. We've seen that there are ample instances where improvements to the rules and to the laws could be made. And that's, of course, very relevant when there are several members of the current Liberal government who have been found to have broken the very ethics laws that we review when we are discussing the Act. And so when we're looking to bring transparency and bring accountability forward for Canadians, and we have the opportunity to review the instances where a conflict of interest screen has been invoked or not, then Canadians can have an understanding when they see the decisions that the Prime Minister is taking and the meetings that he's involved in, which brings us to why travel itineraries are important. And again, you know, the refrain often from Liberal members is, well, there's nothing to see here, and therefore you don't need this information. Don't look over there. And certainly, I would say if there's nothing to hide when we're looking at the head of government, well, then transparency is critical, and sunlight is the best disinfectant. And the same members of the government today are government members, Liberal members, who have been involved in more ethical breaches than any government, than any party in Canadian history. And so it's pretty chilling that when the proposal to reconstitute committees has been brought forward in the House, and it was under the auspices of reflecting the number of seats that the government has in the House, but they're exceeding that percentage. That was their rationale, was that it should mirror or reflect the percentage of seats that they have with their standing on committees, but they've exceeded that. And our amendment that we put forward was to preserve the accountability committees, because we're not dealing with legislation. that's not where the issue has been. And in fact, if the charge has been that there's been a slowdown on the passage of legislation or on review of subject matter or on dealing with agenda items, at this committee there's only been one party who's filibustered, and it's the Liberals. So we have, Chair, you could seek unanimous consent. The last time I suggested that, we had a special guest in Mr. Turnbull, who before I even got the words out of my mouth said that they were intent on filibustering it. But I do think that that this would provide transparency, it would provide accountability, and again, sunlight certainly does prove to be the best disinfectant. And if history is any indicator, if there's reluctance or a refusal to furnish us with the information, then we can infer from that that there is, another cover-up at play.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. On the motion, and I will advise committee members that if there's some digging in on this, that we can go till 10 o'clock tonight. We have resources until that time. So, Monsieur Sari, vous avez la parole. Commencez, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Sari, the floor is yours. Thank you, Chair. All the better that we have resources until 10 p.m. because the topic at hand is so relevant and so important that we all need to understand exactly what the motion seeks to do. The motion that was tabled by my colleague across the way, Mr. Barrett, is a motion that, if I can qualify it, might have noble intentions, but I'm not sure about that. The motion is, if I could say, redundant. And I'll go through it. I'll go through everything that was requested, and you'll be able to see. And I read the motion, and I'm trying to see what we're talking about. The PCO needs to provide the committee information on assessments regarding the application of the screen, knowing that this is something that was already shared with us. This was done after Mr. Sabia testified here at our committee. I would like to remind everyone that the way that the screen is applied and the information that was shared with the public, and that we also received a letter. This letter came from the Privy Council office, and this explains exactly, word for word, what we have in this motion. It explains how the screen was applied. And, most importantly, and what interests us and what interests Canadians who are listening to us today, it's why this screen was administered. In this case, we're talking about the Prime Minister. This screen and the use of the screen is based on conditions. I haven't seen a single witness, not a single witness, call into question the process for conflicts of interest. If I look at the screen here, the Ethics Commissioner recognized here that the current oversight of conflicts of interest that was put into place in order to trigger the screen, and then we have a process to manage the screen, and this was implemented for the Prime Minister, and he said, the Commissioner said, that it is effective. If we're saying that it's effective, perhaps I need to explain what it means. Because again, we're dealing with something that is redundant. For the interest of everyone here, to say that it is effective means that it reaches the goals that were sought. And my question for my colleague who has tabled the motion today, what are we dealing with here? If it is effective, and if these measures meet the goals, why then ask for all of the things in a motion that I am attempting to understand? Because I imagine it was written on the corner of a napkin at the last minute. I understand perhaps the goal, but the Ethics Commissioner stated that the system to control conflicts of interest and the measures are effective. And they are effective in preventing any situation of an appearance of a conflict of interest. So that's for the system that was implemented. And now I'm going to focus on these elements that are in the motion. There were a few things that we heard about today. It's important to know whether or not these measures are applicable. And the answer is yes. The Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's team, they applied the screen. And that screen was said to be effective, by the way. They were transparent with us. They said to us when the screen was used and why. They explained situations that led to the use of the screen. As I said, an assessment was undertaken relating to the application of the screen. We have that. The ethics screen, or the conflict of interest screen, was applied for the Prime Minister. Let's keep going. We're asking to receive information on the 15th day of every month. I understand that if we're talking about the 15th day, we'll have information on the previous month, and we'll have 15 days to produce these reports and send them in. Some might see that as more bureaucracy, but I do understand the 15 days. That said, I think that what my colleague does not understand, and what his team also does not understand, is that currently our country is dealing with a tariff war, and so our Prime Minister is seeking to create partnerships throughout the world so that we are not so overly reliant on the United States. And so what we're asking here, and I want people who are listening to us understand exactly what is being requested. So we're asking that any travel be included. Nothing is being hidden because all of this information is already public. On February 13th, 2026, on February 13th, 2026, the Privy Council office, through a written letter, has committed and reached out to members of this committee on February 13th in order to give us details quarterly, so quarterly details on situations whereby the screen would be used. And we received such a report in November. And on February 13th, we received our first quarterly report. And so, this commitment was respected. But I'm asking my colleague again, what are we talking about? I'll come back to this morning's press conference as well. My colleagues talked about transparency there and the public's trust towards its institutions. That's important. But we can't forget that focusing on perceptions, hypotheticals, and trying to make clips, this can undermine Canadians' trust in their institutions. And I experienced this. I worked with young people so that they could trust their institutions, whether it be police services, fire services, the city, and provincial and federal institutions. But you might find clips on social media where we're seeking to get the highest number of views or focusing on sensationalism instead of facts. And this fragilizes the work done by elected officials, by institutions, by government in order to reach young people and people who are less young. With this motion, we're sending a message saying that the government is hiding things. And it's not true. With this motion, we're saying that, well, maybe the government is not giving us all the information, and that's not true. What's not in this motion, and that's why I'm speaking right now, in order to say that I do not agree with my colleague Michael Barrett on his motion table today. I don't agree because there's a lot of work on transparency that was done by the government and by the Privy Council office. Let's go back to February 13th, 2026. Mr. Barrett spoke earlier, and not once did he mention that we received the first report on the time frame ending on January 31st, 2026, and we received that on February 13th. So we received a report in February. This brings transparency, clarity, and transparency and clarity. Well, that's not only given to our committee, it's also for Canadians. We don't want the application of this screen to be ambiguous. Quite the contrary, in fact. PCO responded and gave us all of the information, and they explained in detail when the screen is used, and I found that to be quite clear and quite complete. And they are open to discussion. Seeing a motion after receiving the report is acting as though no report was given to us. I didn't want to say that that's false, but the perception caused by such a motion, well, it would seem like we're trying to hide something, whereas that's not true. I gave dates and facts, and I talked about things that were shared with us. What we have in the report, and I don't want to forget anything. So a summary of all the uses of the screen, we already received that. We have to say that we've received that. The record of the outcome of each analysis. If you want to have it on a monthly basis, well, not all files are dealt with in 1 month in government. I think that they haven't understood that across the room. Any records of discussions or considerations that are in possession of the PCO, again, it's not information that we're going to have every month. So there's going to be redundancy in that request. It's redundant to what we've already received because we'll be getting the same report because these files will be ongoing. The discussions will not have been concluded. So we're asking as well for any correspondence related to each analysis, including emails, text messages, incident messages, and other records of conversations. And the first report, which shall be provided to the committee by no later than June 15, 2026. I would like to know how many resources are going to be needed in order to receive all of this information, which, again, is redundant because this information will be given to us and has been given to us. But now we're looking for details. But too much information is going to saturate all the information that we're getting. Now let's move on to the second bullet of this motion. I am still focused, even though I might be struggling to find my words here. So, in Mr. Barrett's motion that was tabled today, in point B, order the production of the Prime Minister's travel itineraries and related records for all international travel that he has taken since he became Prime Minister that are in the possession of the PCO, the Prime Minister's office, or any federal government department. And these should include, but not be limited to, each meeting the Prime Minister attended and every attendee at these meetings, and these documents need to be provided to the committee. But you might remember when we met with Mr. Sabia and Mr. Marc-André Blanchard, it was a public meeting, we asked them this question. Well, I think that perhaps only one person in the room was here then and who is here now, and that's Mr. Hardy. And they told us that we would be able to have the information that we were looking for. And so, in focusing on this motion today, it would seem like we don't have all the information that we've requested, even though that is not true. You might understand why I doubt what is being sought here. Point of order, Chair. Mr. Hardy. Point of order? I just want to remind, or what is being said is that we're saying things that are completely false, but that Mr. Sabia and Mr. Blanchard are giving us the information that we're asking for, and if that's true, well, then they can just give us the information. We don't need to talk at length about this if they're going to give us the information requested. Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Mr. Garand, another point of order? People can speak for as long as they like. We know how the game is played here, but misleading the committee is like misleading the House. Members need to think before they speak. Because if they're saying things that are verifiably false, well, that violates our parliamentary privilege, Chair. You are correct, Mr. Garand.
Expect that members will be forthright and truthful in what they say. I don't have any evidence to suggest otherwise, but I appreciate what you say, Monsieur Sari. Recommencez, s'il vous plaît.
Je reviens sur les propos.
I'll come back to what was said by Mr. Sabia. For those who weren't there that day and who are here today, welcome. But we asked them the question, and you can go see their answer. That's all that I would need to say on that. I wanted to come back to point B. I don't remember where I was at. So travel by the Prime Minister and all meetings that he attended, that these documents are provided to the committee without redaction within 6 weeks of the adoption of this motion. That's another element of which I question the relevance. We heard from 2 people who apply the screen for the Prime Minister, and they responded to all of our questions. And now, regarding whether or not the Prime Minister should be made aware regarding the screen if a decision has not been finalized. If the Prime Minister is not informed or shouldn't be informed regarding the use of the screen, and to avoid any potential conflicts, that is something that we need to look at, because the Commissioner spoke about this. We are dealing with something that is redundant, Chair. We are dealing with redundancy with this motion. And there's a lot of detail being requested. We've asked for a report and asking for so many details. Well, all of those details might be less relevant. I'm not an expert, and apologies, I'm not an expert in the efficiency of the work that needs to be done, but I believe that this could slow the work of public servants who already have a lot to do. So I believe that it is redundant. I don't quite understand the goal of this motion, and we want to know what we're trying to say to Canadians who are listening to us. I am questioning how redundant this motion is, but I am also questioning why we need such this level of detail. I take issue with the way this motion was written. The goal, in my view, is not transparency. It's certainly not increasing transparency or building trust. If we want clips, I think you have clips. I think you've got a lot of clips. I think we've all gotten a lot of clips. We've heard a lot of things, and there was a press conference today even. I think we've got a government doing what it needs to do. There's a prime minister who Canadians have chosen to trust in Canada, in Quebec, and throughout Canada, and work is being done, and our prime minister is working hard. And Mr. Barrett is trying very hard to justify his motion, and experts have told us that we need to be careful in tabling motions or proposing changes to legislation or in the way screens can be applied. They cannot be subjective. They cannot depend on a single person. In Mr. Barrett's introduction, he was focusing on a single person, and experts told us that we need to be very careful. We cannot target a single person or a single incident. We need to look at how this motion would apply in the long term. It cannot be linked to a single person. And so, to conclude, I am uncomfortable with this motion, and I do not agree with it. I'm uncomfortable with the motivations of this motion. That's not why I sought to be elected. I am very proud to be a part of this committee. I find that this committee questions legislation and situations to ensure that things are done ethically in our government, but also to ensure that there's transparency for Canadians. And we are working to build trust. But what I'm seeing today is the opposite of what I would seek to do. I have a lot of questions for Mr. Barrett regarding the level of detail requested, which will slow the work of our public servants who are doing excellent work. I don't believe that with this request, with this motion, it will really help them. It will undermine their efficiency and effectiveness, and we need to take that into account in tabling this kind of motion. I have a few quick questions for Mr. Barrett. My questions are as follows. Did he read the report from February? Has he read the report? In reading his motion, it's as though the committee hadn't received anything. The level of detail in the report, is that insufficient in his view? Is the report not showing the government's goodwill? Is it not showing transparency? If we want to table a motion very quickly, well, it shows a sense of urgency. And that's my question to Mr. Barrett. What's the urgency? Why table this so quickly? What triggered him to table this motion? Why is it so urgent to receive that level of detail? This is very redundant. It requests a level of detail that is excessive. And I hope that my colleague, Mr. Barrett, will take the time to reflect and perhaps change his view given the report that we received at this committee. Perhaps he can think about his motion and perhaps take the motion back, withdraw the motion.
J'ai une liste.
I have a speaking list here with Mr. Hardy. Mr. Hardy, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. So we just finished 17 hours of a Liberal monologue. My colleague spoke for 25 minutes in his preamble. Others have joined them. Phone calls were made, and we're going to restart this circus. I listened to my colleague closely, and I'll be brief. I want to defend the interests of Canadians. And if there's no transparency, or as we saw this morning during an announcement, the Liberals came to say that 20 of the 23 recommendations, if not all of the recommendations, would be denied, well, it already shows that things aren't working. So there needs to be a representation from those who don't always agree with the Liberals. We're talking about efficiencies, and I'll go through my notes very quickly, but who thinks that this is efficient? We don't think that it is. We're told to stop asking questions, that we're slowing things down, but if they find it effective, well, then it's effective. So the only effectiveness can be a Liberal effectiveness. They've been quoting witnesses, and they're quoting direct employees of the Prime Minister. So I don't know how that can be neutral or fair for Canadians when the only two people being quoted since before are two people who work for the Prime Minister. So I think that we have a motion here seeking clarity. It's seeking transparency. We're Thursday night. We just had 2 hours of a committee meeting on lobbying where witnesses again told us that transparency and accountability are essential for rebuilding trust in our institutions. And now we're being told that we're being sensationalist, that Mr. Barrett wrote this on a napkin, and that we need to show the facts. We're asking to have access to this information so that we can share information so that people can make their own opinions on the situation. We're not asking you to go through the information that we're requesting. We're not asking you to tell us which information is relevant. We're asking you to give us the information so that those who want to criticize the government can criticize and ask questions. But again, Mr. Cooper was interrupted 6 times in tabling a motion, and the chair, who was not Mr. Brassard at the time, cut him off many times, and Liberal Party members cut him off many times as well.
Bonne question. So therein lies the issue. For them, it's not a good question unless it's a Liberal question. So you said that we want to have clips for social media, but you just had a 17-hour monologue. I think you'll have a lot of clips, as a matter of fact. So I'm not sure that's what you want to draw attention to. But when you hold the mic for 17 hours straight, don't say that we're the ones who want to have clips for media. You're obviously bent on being on TV. And next to me, there's a report. I'm not sure if I can show this on camera, but it's a StatsCan report that says that a fair amount of Canadians have access or have confidence or have trust in the institutions. And this is StatsCan saying that very few Canadians have access or have trust in our institutions. So I think transparency would be the first thing to do so that Canadians regain trust in government and in their institutions. And it's also being said We're also being asked, where is the urgency? Well, we spoke at length about this. If you want to control every committee, that's why there's urgency. For the first time, a parliament has become a majority government without having that majority validated by electors. And we won't be able to hold government to account if that's the case. So that's why there's a feeling of urgency. So when will we end this? When there will be transparency. When finally you will be transparent with Canadians, with Quebecers, when people will finally feel that the government answers questions. Because that's our role. And I will conclude on this. It's not a question of liberals versus conservatives versus the Bloc. No. The question is that we have one of the best parliaments in the world, and under our system, we can hold the government to account, regardless of which party is forming government, and that is paramount. What we're going through today and what we're going to see in the coming weeks, because you've demonstrated what's coming down the pipe, the thing is that when you will have a majority on committees, we'll be interrupted every 2 minutes, as you did to Mr. Cooper a few minutes ago. So that's why there's a feeling of urgency. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Hardy.
That has Ms. Church, Ms. Lapointe, Mr. Saini, and Mr. Hogan on it. I am going to suggest that the parties talk about this over the next couple of days, figure out whether there is something that can be agreed to. If not, it's up to you guys. But I don't want to continue this tonight, and I'm not continuing this tonight. So I will suspend to the call of the chair, and we will resume this. I did have resources tomorrow from 9 till midnight, but we will resume this Monday afternoon at 3:30. So this meeting is suspended till that time to the call of the chair. Thank you. Meeting suspended.